very much. Thanks everyone for allowing me to come and to present this material to you this evening. And as you know, we're talking about the sexualisation of children through education. Why should we be concerned about the sexualisation of children? The Australian Psychological Society says mental health professionals are increasingly concerned about the prevalence of sexualised images of children and early adolescents in the media. These images appear to be widely used in advertising and represent children, including pre-pubertal children, in ways more congruent with adult sexuality. The values impact in the images are that physical appearance and beauty are intrinsic to self-esteem and social worth, and that sexual attractiveness is a part of childhood experience. Research has shown that the exploitation of children, particularly girls, as sexual objects has a detrimental effect on adolescent development, increasing the risk of depression, eating disorders, and low self-esteem. The unrealistic depiction of children in a sexualized manner is not only harmful to girls and women, but has wider consequences in the community. And we're certainly seeing a lot of those consequences. Now, this young girl, a 9-year-old actress, is pictured like this. Now, if any of you are looking at this and thinking, oh gee, that's not so bad, that's because we have so much of this around us all the time that we're actually becoming desensitized to the sexualization of young girls and women. So if you thought that's not too bad, some people do. It's because you, through a process of seeing these images all the time everywhere, have become a little bit desensitized to it. Now, the article was called Stealing the Innocence of Children, and one of the things they talked about was how many health professionals argue that a sex-soaked culture is taking an insidious toll on the emotional, psychological, and physical well-being of children and young adolescents. And you can see many articles written all over the internet that are making that point. I was reading an article written by a woman, and she actually said, "We are the problem." And the reason she said we are the problem is you hear things like, oh, but they just look so cute. Oh, but they're just adorable in that little outfit. And she was saying how sometimes we're not aware, or when you raise protest, you are stopped from your protest by, oh, but they're just so cute. It's just a bit of harmless fun, and not recognizing that it's actually not harmless. A government report written in Western Australia has some summarising points. It summarised a number of studies and inquiries undertaken in Australia and the United Kingdom, which have variously claimed that sexualisation of children may impede children's development of a healthy body image, affect children's self-esteem, affect aspects of children's cognitive and emotional development, impact upon children's mental and physical health and well-being, including by the potential development of eating disorders, depression, and appearance anxiety, affect how children conceptualize femininity and sexuality and gender and sexual roles, contribute to or provoke sexual harassment or sexualized violence in schools and workplaces, and affect educational achievements for girls and lower their aspirations. So as you can see, there's a great number of very negative impacts that we have on children and young people through the sexualization of them. A friend drew my attention a couple of weeks ago to a school video. I don't know if I need to say any more, but if you look at this, just the 3 screenshots that I caught, you can see that we have children imitating having sex with each other in a school video. They look like they're about 6 years old, these children. I wondered, do they have a dance teacher that's taught them that, or how have they actually learned to dance in that particular way? Has it come from music videos? That's another area to be really aware of. In music videos today, kids are seeing really terrible things. I want to take you back to the roots of where all this sexualization began. And not many people would be aware of this, but the Kinsey Institute, Alfred Kinsey, is actually the beginning of the sexualization of children. He's known as the father of sexology, and this is what is said about him. His groundbreaking and controversial research on human sexuality profoundly influenced social and cultural values. You're not wrong, it has had a profound influence, but not in a good way. Kinsey published Sexual Behaviour in the Human Male in 1948, followed by Sexual Behaviour in the Human Female in 1953. The two books, known as the Kinsey Reports, became bestsellers and sparked a firestorm of controversy. And it was in these books being published, which carried fraudulent research. He talked about the average male, and what actually happened was a lot of the people he interviewed were people who were in prison or had been released for sexual offences. So the average male actually turned out to be a high proportion of sexual offenders that were interviewed. He himself paraded as a happily married man. He actually was in an open marriage, which back then is very radical, okay? So he and his wife had an agreement they could have sex with whoever they wished to have sex. He was a homosexist. He believed in the superiority of homosexuality, so he and his research assistants were having lots of sex. He was a porn addict, and he believed that sexual acts with children are harmless. And so all of that came in to his research, as he called it. He was the founder of the myth that children are sexual beings from birth, and you may have heard that. Okay, he used what I would call cultural conditioning. This was written about in a different book, but this is a good description of what cultural conditioning is. Our effect is achieved without reference to facts, logic, or proof. Through repeated infralogical emotional conditioning, the person's belief can be altered whether he is conscious of the attack or not. Indeed, the more he is distracted by even specious surface arguments, the less conscious he will be of the true nature of the process. So anyone who disagrees, they use what they call jamming, which is they shut you up by calling you names. Oh, you're just a conservative. Who are you to judge? You're such a prude. You old school dinosaur. Okay, so we'll call you names to shut you up. That's how they actually get away with presenting false research, so that even when professionals in the field contest it, they get name called and labelled and bullied into submission with what is being taught through people such as the Kinsey Institute. Now that lie has spread so that we have come to the point where you have lots of websites. You've got this lovely picture of these two young children, and underneath it the word sexual beings. The top of the site, it looks lovely, holistic, mindful, sustainable, courageous, sharing the new story of childhood, parenthood and the human family, an alternative media and non-profit educational project. And this is what they're putting up, children as sexual beings. You will find lots of them. Another one aimed at youth, okay? We've got the Youth Embassy website. And as you can see there, it says, all human beings from birth until death are sexual beings. It took about 30 years for Alfred Kinsey to be exposed as a man who was working with pedophiles. And a lot of his research came from working with pedophiles very directly. You can see in his first book in 1948, he published a couple of tables around sex with children, okay? Now here we have a 5-month-old, number of orgasms of a 5-month-old baby, 3 orgasms. Don't know how long over that period of time that was. An 11th month old, 10 orgasms in 1 hour. So they've been masturbating this 10-month-old baby for an hour. Like, how do they get this particular data? So this was in his book. It's evidence of his work with pedophiles to say children have orgasms. Now, let me tell you a little bit about how orgasms are described by this man. Fainting, screaming. The understanding that we have of childhood sexuality and normal childhood sexual development, as it is believed and taught in academia today, comes from the experimental evidence documented in Kinsey's report published in 1948 with the childhood sexuality tables that we are discussing. It is absolutely astonishing that this is taken as the basis for what we understand to be normal childhood sexual development. And when I try to explain this to colleagues in the type of science I'm involved with, in what I call the harder sciences of biology or medicine, statistics, immunology, they do not believe me. And the only way I can convince them of the truth of this is to go to the library, pull off the shelf of Alfred Kinsey's books and show them what is inside, and it's quite shocking. And that's a researcher, Gordon Muir, a scientist who's written that. Some of the other things that were written about the supposed orgasms. Some of the children exhibited extreme trembling, collapse, loss of colour, and sometimes fainting. To me, that sounds very much like trauma. I don't know about you, but that sounds like trauma to me. The males in the group will fight away from the partner. Notice they're calling these little children partner, and may make violent attempts to avoid climax, although they derive definitive pleasure from the situation. So you can see how sick the minds of the people are that were involved in this. And there's another table, okay? Many children were badly abused by people who Alfred Kinsey came into contact with. And I was listening to a video which you can go online, it's on YouTube, called The Secret History of Kinsey's Pedophiles. And in it, one of the people who was talking about the confidentiality they gave to pedophiles, and he was asked, why do you refuse to name them? He said, that would be immorality of the highest order. To actually expose the pedophile was immorality of the highest order, not the acts that were perpetrated on these poor innocent children. So it shows how twisted their minds were. Now, as I was doing some of this research, I was reading this book by Rebecca Andrews, Policing Innocence. Is Your Child Really Safe? And she works in Britain for the undercover unit that catches pedophiles. And the first sentence I read was, the pedophile is sexually aroused by children. And I thought, that just ties in with who sees children as sexual beings from birth? A pedophile. That's who sees children as a sexual being from birth. And those who've been trained to think that way because they've listened to the teaching, which has become apparently scientific, but there's no scientific basis or evidence to it whatsoever. A child only becomes sexual when a child has that imposed upon them either through sexual abuse or through lots of magazines or other things thrust in their face. So that's when they become sexual beings. They're not actually born that way. I want to go into sexualization through education because that's what Alfred Kinsey dove into. Is he changed the education system as well as the legal system and many other systems. It's all based on his work, the sexualization we have in our society. And there was one article about a school reading list including lesbian sex and a gay orgy. And it talked about how in this New Jersey school district, they apologised to parents after requiring high school students to read books that include graphic depictions of lesbian sex and a homosexual orgy. What really struck me was the superintendent said, students have seen more graphic things on television or in the movies. And that in itself tells you how bad our society is becoming, that the superintendent of the school district can actually justify it with a sentence like that. So book reading lists in schools are also a real problem. This, continuing on with Kinsey Institute, this comes from what's called Kinsey confidentiality. And I'm just bringing a couple of the things that Kinsey Institute still teaches out, because they are the ones that are actually providing the education to all of the sex educators worldwide. So are these the kinds of values you want sex educators to be passing on to your children? This person asks, I'm 25 and I've slept with 15 people. I started having sex at 15, but my most amount of partners were during my first year at university. Am I a slut? Ain't nobody's business. The number of sex partners a person has is a personal choice, and it's no one's business but their own. So the values that are coming through, it doesn't matter how many sexual partners you have. You know, we used to think promiscuity was a bad thing, and now promiscuity is being hailed as a good thing, as right. When I grew up, purity was a value that was instilled in me, and I'm really grateful for that value of purity, because it saved me from a lot of grief that I see a lot of people go through who don't have that value. So you can see how far their minds go, and these are the people who have what is called ECOSOC accreditation. Okay, this was granted by the United Nations to the Kinsey Institute, and what that means is that they are the official professional body to tell us how to educate your kids on sex education. That's what that means. Now, in response to that particular accreditation, several people launched a campaign from Croatia called Don't Touch the Children, because they were aware of the teaching of Kinsey and how unhealthy it was. And they wrote to the UN and asked them to examine the Kinsey accreditation. They sent one to each head of the UN member states, explaining the nature of the Kinsey research, what I've just been explaining to you, and including the pedophilic data and evidence. Not one member state acknowledged the letter. So we have a serious issue that you can't even appeal to the United Nations about what's going on and not get a response. I think that's a really serious issue. And I wonder, why has an organisation, the Kinsey Institute, that has obviously worked with pedophiles, never been investigated? I have serious questions as to why that can actually happen when so many people actually know the truth as it's slowly being spread. The major media doesn't pick this up. The major media seems more interested in covering it up than picking it up. So that's one of the things we fight as well. I've put this in here because I wanted you to see, connected to the Kinsey Institute is Dr. John Money. Has anyone heard of Dr. John Money before? No, most people, a couple of people have heard of him. So Dr. John Money had an idea, okay? And his idea was that male and female is really just a social construct. You're only really female and act female because you're brought up in a home that treats you like a girl because you were born as a girl. And you're only really male, displaying the characteristics of a male because you were born as a boy, and so now biologically, and so now people treat you like a boy. It's all a social construct. He was a psychologist, sexologist, and author. By the way, Alfred Kinsey was the first sexologist. He actually created that particular profession, specializing into sexual identity and biology of gender. He was one of the first scientists to study the psychology of sexual fluidity. I could be a boy today, I can be a girl tomorrow, depends how I feel, and how the societal constructs of gender affect an individual. So you can see this is actually the basis of a lot of the safe schools teaching that you've been hearing about, okay? His work has been both celebrated for its innovation and criticised. He's received around 65 worldwide honours, awards and degrees. Well, Dr. Money actually came across a perfect test case for his theory about boy and girl being a social construct, because these twins were born and they had a problem urinating, and the doctor said circumcision was the answer. The problem was that when David Reimer was circumcised, basically it was botched and he lost his entire penis in the operation. And so as a result of this, the mum's thinking and the dad, he's never going to be happy. And they hear Dr. Money speaking about how it's a social construct and he can turn a boy into a girl and a girl into a boy and they'll be very, very happy. So the parents, after a lot of debate and wrestling, decide to allow Dr. Money to turn their son into Brenda. So he becomes Brenda. And the brother Bruce, they're growing up, Brenda and Bruce. A lot of journal articles are written in the professional magazines for the industry, and Dr. Money is hailing this as a success. It's working. He is adapting very well. It's going great. But the truth was, he was depressed and developing lots of psychological and emotional problems. Eventually, his dad has to tell him that he's actually being born as a boy. And his dad thinks, it's going to be devastating. And he was actually relieved. He's like, oh, thank God, I thought there was something horribly wrong with me. Now it all makes sense. I actually am a boy. Now I understand why I feel the way I feel. So all of the social conditioning that the parents had tried to do, no, you don't shave, you're a girl, all of the stuff they tried on Brenda didn't work. The actual experiment from Dr. Money was a complete failure, yet for years he hailed it as a success. And it was only when David Reimer found out that his case was being used, because it was being used anonymously. It was called the John Jones story. And it was only when he found out about it that he set the record straight with the help of another psychologist and said, no, that's not true. And it's actually a really, really sad story. His brother couldn't cope, apparently, with the knowledge that his sister was really born a boy. Dr. Money would show them sexualized images in his office and say, who do you feel more attracted to, this one or this one? And he'd actually get them as young children to do sex acts with each other. So to me, that means Dr. Money was really a pedophile himself, because of what he was forcing these young children to do. So it's no wonder they had severe psychological and emotional problems. And not David, but his brother Brian developed schizophrenia and ended up suiciding on his medication. And sadly, David also suicided sometime later. So that's a really tragic, sad story. While people didn't know the truth, Dr. Money set a standard that is now still being followed and used. Now, there was resistance by a lot of people, and the former psychiatrist-in-chief at Johns Hopkins Hospital realised there were some serious issues. And so what he did was he actually led the charge in banning the transgender surgeries, in stopping them from occurring in the hospital. And basically, he said that in the 1960s, they were the first American medical center to venture into sex reassignment surgery. But they launched a study in the 1970s comparing the outcomes of transgendered people who had the surgery with the outcomes of those who did not. Most of the surgically treated patients described themselves as satisfied by the results, but their subsequent psychosocial adjustments were no better than those who didn't have the surgery. And so at Hopkins, we stopped doing sex reassignment surgery, since producing a satisfied but still troubled patient seemed an inadequate reason for surgically amputating normal organs. And you hear a lot about what's called sex change regret, but you won't hear a lot about it in mainstream media. And what tends to happen is those who have a sex change and then regret it, there's so much shame that it's not hard for those who are lobbying for transgenderism to quieten them up and to silence them through bullying and intimidation. So, Dr. McHugh several years later writes, policymakers and the media are doing no favours either to the public or the transgendered by treating their confusions as a right in need of defending, rather than as a mental disorder that deserves understanding, treatment and prevention. This intensely felt sense of being transgendered constitutes a mental disorder in two respects. The first is that the idea of sex misalignment is simply mistaken. It does not correspond with physical reality. The second is that it can lead to grim psychological outcomes. And what always boggles my mind is we teach in mental health that feelings are not facts, and when you treat feelings as if they are facts, that creates mental distress. And that's exactly what's happening for someone who's experiencing gender dysphoria. They're treating their feelings as if their feelings are facts. And there is no other area that we do that. And if you're wondering why has the transgender movement made so much progress, it's simply because medical doctors make a lot of money from it, and so they're actually really happy to promote this because they make a lot of money from it. And some other people have other agendas in promoting transgenderism. So what tends to happen is those that oppose it are silenced by those who want it to move forward, and that's what's been happening. So now you've got people hearing a boy born in a woman's body, and people are going, that doesn't make sense, how did we get here? That's how we got there, because people who have the knowledge to say no, that can't be right, have been silenced by intimidation and bullying. So, affecting us in our schools in Victoria, we have an extremely disturbing arsenal of social engineering schemes that have been lined up against Victorian children and their parents in a triad of safe schools, resilience, rights and respectful relationships, and the Doctors in Secondary Schools programs. Scratch beneath the surface of these three sweet-sounding initiatives and you will find Kinsey-esque child sexualization, unproven sociological gender theories being presented as fact, and unsupervised GP appointments being conducted behind parents' backs on school grounds during school hours. Now, these programs are actually sexualizing children. They're saying to children, experiment, find out if you're this or find out if you're that. They're actually teaching kids to experiment sexually. So this program, not only is it teaching contested gender theories, but it's also sexualizing children in that it's telling children, go out and experiment. See what you feel like. See whether you're really a girl or a boy. What do you feel like you are? They also tend to, if you look at some of their advertising, they make risky forms of sex look cool and attractive. So they're encouraging risky sexual behaviours. Now you might think, oh, well, if you send your child to a Catholic school because they believe in chastity until marriage, you'll be okay. But sadly, sex education, even in Catholic schools, has its downfalls. I was speaking to a young lady, beautiful young girl, not long ago, and she was telling me how she left a Catholic school and went to a different school because of the sex education that was provided at that school. They had an outside educator come to the school here in Ballarat to provide these sex education classes. And some of the comments she made to me, this is someone who was 13 at the time, they left the class and they're like, we felt like we had to bleach our minds, and that's what they were all saying to each other. I have to bleach my mind, you know. So they're actually recognizing that this was unhealthy for them. They had an excursion. They went to a nightclub as 13-year-olds to be shown around the nightclub and the different areas. Now, is that really an appropriate excursion for 13-year-old students to go into a nightclub and to see the different areas, and this is where you can get the free condoms if you need the free condoms, and all of that information. So you can see how 13-year-olds are being sexualized through sex education and through radical gender programs. The sexualization of children and young people is a whole of community issue that requires a multifaceted response from parents as well as industry bodies such as the media, advertisers, retailers, and legislators. So we all need to get involved if we're going to make a difference, and that came out through the WA report. Now, you may or may not have heard of this. None of the mainstream media carried the story, but last year they broke the largest pedophile ring in history with 70,000 members, which included heads of state and many other very high-profile people. So, just to get an idea of how big the problem is, pedophilia obviously is sexualization of children. It's taking away and stealing their innocence as well as the abuse that it creates for them. And it's one of the biggest problems we're currently going to be facing. And I say that because there's a lot of people who are now pushing for a new term for pedophilia, minor attracted persons, MAPS. And they're pushing for it in several ways. They're minimizing the trauma of the abuse on children and young people. And here's one article that shows you how much they're minimizing that. They're saying, the case clearly involves a process of change that has been commented on elsewhere, that 95% of sexual contacts between adults and children aged under 12 are situations where trauma does not happen at the time the sexual contact occurs. Trauma is experienced when the young person comes to appreciate society's views and punishment directed at the person involved in such exchanges. So in other words, it's our fault for saying that they shouldn't have been abused, that the person has trauma. It's not the trauma of being abused that's the problem. It's us actually saying that's traumatic. By acknowledging how bad it is, we're the problem, not the sexual abuse. There's an organisation called Before You Act that's been advocating for quite some while to change pedophilia. And some of the things that you'll have heard if you've gone to a conference, this is from someone who's reported on it, pedophilia as an orientation is not a choice. It's not my choice, it's an orientation. I was born that way. Have you heard that somewhere before? Efforts to treat pedophilia are similar to methods used on homosexuals 50 years ago and similarly ineffective. So in other words, don't try and treat pedophilia. You'll be as much of a failure as you were trying to treat homosexuals. Minor attracted persons do not exhibit narcissism, psychosexual immaturity, psychopathology, neurosis, or any personality disorder more than people attracted to adults. So in other words, they're saying a pedophile is just like you and me, just like anyone. And according to Kramer, many pedophiles, minor attracted persons, interact with minors in a variety of non-sexual ways and develop close friendships with them. I'm sure that's very comforting for you parents to hear that the pedophiles are acting with your children in a variety of non-sexual ways and developing close friendships. Pornography and its impact. And I think we're all aware this is becoming quite a huge issue now around us, the pornography that we are facing everywhere around us. There is compelling evidence that pornography is having a profound impact on the lives of children by shaping young people's sexual understandings, expectations, and practices. I don't know if anyone heard about it, but they were actually at one point saying we should use pornography in sex education classes in high school as part of their sex education. Like, that's how bad some people are in their thinking. Children's exposure to pornographic materials puts one at increased risk of developing sexual deviant tendencies, committing sexual offences, experiencing difficulties in one's intimate relationships, and accepting the rape myth. Given the sharp rise in addiction rates, the rise of freely available hardcore pornography on the internet, and the very high rate of consumption of pornography by children, it is obvious that immediate action to curb children's exposure to internet pornography is needed. A universal, by default, ISP-level internet filtering regime at the Commonwealth level is needed to provide a child-friendly, clean feed internet service. The increase in the use of smartphones to access the internet means it is essential that this extend to mobile services. And we know that there's huge impacts on children of pornography, and as they grow, it will also destroy the capacity for intimacy in relationships. And they talk about internet pornography as our mistress of the day, which it also encourages promiscuity, a major cause of marriage relationship breakdown that we see today. So there's some helpful places you can go in fighting sexualization of children. One of them is called Porn Harms Kids, and that's a website that gives lots of good information. It has information for educational institutions, for parents and teachers, as well as for those who might have got hooked into pornography. And there's a pledge there that you can sign, add your name, okay, and the pledge says, I pledge to stand for a world where children can grow up without being psychologically harmed by accessing graphic, violent pornography online. Prevention of children's access, given that porn is linked to increasing risks of STIs and other harmful physical and relational outcomes. Higher standards for ISPs, tech and porn companies to implement technology-related child protection buffers to block harmful pornography content, and adults, including the Australian government, to exercise due diligence to protect children. Now, a very helpful way that we can help children is first we can model modesty ourselves. So we can think about the way we dress, you know, forget the short shorts and the low necklines. Let's dress with modesty and be a good model to kids that it's not about our body, it's actually about our character, it's about who we are. We can complain when we see the sexualization of children. I'm going to show you a website in a moment, and that will be a very helpful tool for understanding how to complain. Talk to your child's school. If you've got concerns about what's going on in their sex education, talk to them. Voice your concerns. Don't be silenced. And move your child to another school if you need to. Write to your MPs where you have areas of concern in your area. Write to your MP if you're concerned about a program in school, if you're concerned about bulletin boards and advertising. Write to your MP when you see things in your area. Let them get sick of you writing to them. Call for ISP level internet filtering and sign petitions. Now, Collective Shout is a great website. They have lots of resources and links and information, keeping people up to date. So if you want to be actively involved in fighting the sexualization of children, this would be a good website to sign up to and to get their email updates from. Exceptionally helpful. They are a grassroots campaign movement against the objectification of women and the sexualization of girls. It's for anyone concerned about the increasing pornification of culture and the way its messages have become entrenched in mainstream society, presenting distorted and dishonest ideas about women and girls, sexuality and relationships. So thank you so much for coming to this evening's presentation. I hope that I don't know if enjoy is the right term, but I hope that you'll go away feeling a lot more informed, but also thinking about how you can be empowered to change things as much as you can within the community around you. So thanks very much. Take care.